All right, just so everyone's aware, there's going to be a slight delay between probably what you hear and what you see because I'm projecting from the YouTube and not the laptop that Dana's on. All right, we're live.
Wow.
Okay.
There is a dynamic.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, quite a lot.
That's like the old censorship delays used to have on television.
All right.
Oh, there is. Look at that.
I'm just going to sit here and do this thing. Okay.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all so much for coming and for bearing with us with these technical difficulties, and Shane's doing a great job double computering over there. So thanks for joining us. This is for Left Bank Books and the St. Louis Poetry Center, here to present Brian Teare and Dana Levin for a night of poetry and discussion. Critically acclaimed poets Teare and Levin will discuss themes from their newest books, focusing on transforming oppressions of the body and family. The evening will take twists and turns as the poets discuss connections between their works, creating a very unique event. Tonight's event is possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy. It helps keep our store open. It also keeps your streets paved, your libraries funded, and your parks free, and all the other wonderful things that make St. Louis such a beautiful place. I would like to thank you all for shopping local and supporting this event. And we'd also like to welcome our virtual guest, thank you guys, on the internet there. And my name is Elena Jove, and I'm a bookseller here at Left Bank Books. And we are really excited to be producing such great in-person events here at the store and beyond for this summer and fall. So check out our event calendar on our website, which is at left-bank.com. So we will also be partnering with the Poetry Center for another event next week at the High Low for the observable Matt Donovan and Elizabeth Hoover. And then on October 5th in store, we will be hosting award-winning poet Mary Jo Bang and Ariana. So tonight's books that we'll be looking at are going to be Poem Bitten by a Man, and the fall of Poem Bitten by a Man. An associate professor of poetry at the University of Virginia, Brian lives in Charlottesville, where he makes books by hand for his Albion Books. Dana Levin is the author of 5 books of poetry. Her latest is a Copper Canyon Press 2022 book. The New York Times labeled it as a notable book, and MP include Banana Palace, published in 2016, and Sky Burial, published in 2011, which the New Yorker called utterly her own and utterly riveting. Recent poems and essays have appeared in Poem-A-Day, Best American Poetry, the American Poetry Review, and Poetry, among other publications. She is a recipient of many honors, including those from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Library of Congress, as well as the Rona Jeff, Whiting, and Guggenheim Foundations. Levin serves as a distinguished writer in residence at Maryville University in St. Louis. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and we will get started.
Dana is going to read first, and then I'm going to read, and then we'll have dialogue.
Are you waiting for
Dana,
me to
can
do
you hear
something?
us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Oh no!
Yes. We can hear you, just very intermittently.
Should I do something?
It's not a one-hand clapping.
Hold on, Dana. I'm gonna do.
Friends, this is because I'm getting over COVID. This is why this is happening.
We didn't just torture you all for fun.
Yeah. Tell me when to do something and I will.
Give me just one more moment.
I'm cool.
Are you mouthing words or are you talking?
I think the videos.
I'm not doing anything.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay.
That's okay.
It's okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I think.
Why don't we just do the sound?
Yeah, let's do that. Because then it's our internet. Okay.
That's okay.
That's okay. All right, Dana, do you want to start?
Okay. So I have COVID and this is day 9 and I did not want to come to the store and because I'm still pretty tired and also, you know, I don't want to give anybody COVID, though I don't think I'm infectious anymore. So I really do appreciate Shane going to the trouble of trying to make this work. And it's also ironic that I'm dealing with COVID because tonight we want to come here and talk about the travails of the body. First of all, before I continue, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, there was a big delay there. All right. So I'm just gonna proceed. So thank you for coming, and thank you for coming out for Brian, because this book is really amazing, and I just love it, and I hope you are buying it and having him sign it. And for anybody who's out there in the digital world watching this, please get a copy of this book. I'm just going to read from a portion of a long piece in Now Do You Know Where You Are that's called Appointment. I have to give you a little bit of background to it before I read the excerpt. In 2017, in particular, I was having a crisis of faith and confidence. I was very freaked out about the election of Donald Trump. I was getting ready to leave Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I had lived for 19 years, and move to St. Louis, a city I knew very little about. And for years, I had been going to see this body worker named Mark Jensen, who was a very amazing person, a truly gifted healer and eccentric character. And this piece, Appointment, opens with a session of going to see him. And then describes him, and then also begins to talk about why I started to see Jensen in the first place, which has to do with the circumstances of my birth. And to get to the chase of that, I was born very, very ill. I had to have a complete blood transfusion. And then a couple of days after that, I started to die again. And it turned out that I had gangrene of the intestine, and I had many surgeries, and I spent the first 2 months of my life in an incubator. And I've had lifelong issues particularly musculoskeletal, because of this. So I'm just going to read the first brief section and then I'm going to leap ahead. I do want you to note that all of this was written and is about, not written, but was about conversation in 2017, because we end up having a conversation that ends up being pretty prescient about our moment now. Appointment 1. Jensen cracked my recalcitrant neck, and I felt finally that I was fully facing the can't see of the future. He said that he felt a whole new person was trying to be born from inside me, the way an island wells up from the ancient crust, all lava and steam, all heat and fire and mineral. That's how I saw it as he said it. He said, "Can you let yourself be completely rewired?" He said, "This is what the earth is doing. We have to get ready." He said, "Something primordial eons ago ended up in you, so it can say something." Now I'm going to leap ahead to part 10 and read to the end. Dream. I'm packing a suitcase. A male figure stands to my right, talking emphatically and pointedly, but I'm not really listening. I stuff my large, square, maroon couch pillow into the suitcase. In life, it's way too big for a suitcase if I want to pack anything else. I manage to pack the pillow and feel some accomplishment as I successfully shut the top. Then I'm walking down a sidewalk in a city at night, alone, rolling the suitcase behind me. I'm a little concerned with how heavy it is in terms of my own stamina, but right now, when I remember soon, I can put it in luggage. No one is about in the night city. I roll along the perimeter of the park. And all at the edge where park meets sidewalk, fledglings have gathered, spreading their wings, too young really to make much display, but displaying anyway, fledgling ravens and buzzards. When I wake up, I think how those birds were the charnel ground birds, carrion eaters, the earth purifiers, how the perimeter of the park was like one of the perimeters of the Tibetan Buddhist mandala. You have to walk through the cemetery on your journey to the center of light. But in the dream, I am walking by on the way to somewhere else. Now I think I should have stopped and done the heroic thing, entered the park mandala to weave through the cremation fires and feel my way through the long night of ghosts and dogs and bones. But I didn't. Where was I going? Scars. In the second month of it became apparent that if they did not induce labor, the fetus inside her would die. Thus, 6 weeks early, yellow with jaundice, I was pushed into the light. And after the exchange transfusion, after the complete exsanguination of my old diseased blood and the stream of new blood, I started once again to die. Neonatal necrotizing enterocolitis, a complication induced by the exchange transfusion. Gangrene of the intestine, which my mother later told me was discovered by a surgeon based on the guess of Dr. Harold Brown, the beloved family pediatrician. Dr. Brown even rushed me into surgery before getting permission from my parents. I was 6 days old. I weighed less than a bag of flour. The surgeon opened me up from sternum to pelvis and found the gangrenous ileum. He removed it and a portion of my intestine and attached a colostomy bag to my body. I spent the first 2 months of my life in an incubator, and I'm still attracted to the smallest, most bordered and ignored spaces of any room I am in. The one between the wall and a bed in a hotel room, for instance, or the empty space you might find under a landing and a stair, wanting to nestle in right there. In the neonatal ward, nurses put a feeding tube in each ankle. Is that scientifically accurate, feeding through the ankle? It's what my mother told me. I wish she were alive to confirm. When I sit on a yoga mat with my legs straight out in front of me and stretch forward to grab my ankles, I can feel the scars there, the depressions the feeding tubes left. My nails and my teeth are soft and discolored and easily chipped. because of how many antibiotics they gave me those first months of my life. My feet are pronated, and my legs below the knee look to me like they're misaligned with my thighs. My mother once said that Dr. Brown, after the surgery, told my parents my legs might be affected and recommended leg braces to correct them, but my parents refused, remembering the shame and difficulty of President Roosevelt. Another time, she told my oldest sister that they didn't get the leg braces because she didn't want me to look like the braced baby in the ads for March of Dimes. And then, as I neared 50, when knee and back and hip pain and numbness increased and began to alarm me, I wondered if my musculoskeletal issues stemmed from what had happened to me, which is how I ended up with Walter, the osteopath, who for a time aligned my legs and then forwarded me to M. Jensen, incarnation specialist. I let Jensen cradle my head in his two hands for what seemed a universe of minutes. Sometimes this cradling would stop flat, everything clattering around in my skull, and I would feel like pure awareness, curious, alert, awake. I always think of this as my essential soul state before neurosis wells, before the needs and discomforts of the flesh reassert themselves. Pure awareness, interested and bemused by what it means to be alive and aware in a body. Incubators in 1965 were like human terrariums. In the photo I have, taken by my father, I'm lying on my stomach asleep and massively diapered or bandaged or both. I face a closed, round porthole bigger than my little head, and there's a closed, round porthole at my bandaged feet. Here's where the gloved hands reached in to touch me. Jensen's large, open, expressive hands. Sometimes he would tap his cupping fingers around the base of my skull and reposition my head with sudden, precise, assertive movements, muttering all the while. He muttered in tongues when he worked on me. It was no language I could recognize. I never asked about it. When he resorted to the tactics of chiropractic and something in my skeletal system released, he'd snap his fingers and answer. Pop, snap, call and response. Sometimes he cradled my sacrum for what seemed a universe of minutes. All my conscious focus would assemble there, and I would calm. Sometimes he would push a finger deep into the pit of my deepest scar. He held me. Maybe just this was the healing outside the portholes and gloved hands and glass box into which I had once been deposited after a knife wounded me so I could live. Sometimes we would talk while he worked on my scarred and misaligned body. Mostly we talked about the end of the world. With absolute certainty in its imminence, we talked about it. We were in complete accord. It felt comforting to share our certainties about extinction, this healer and this healed, us. We believed in the power and resiliency of the earth. We weren't sure people would make it into the next age. One time he told me his son worked in national security, and I didn't believe him. Then he showed me a photo. It was like looking at Jensen in an alternate universe, same hawk face, younger, in military dress, something like bars or medals pinned to his breast. One time he said, guess what the #1 concern in national security circles is? Terrorism? No. Nukes? No. What? I asked. Pandemic. He stopped working on me and stood and looked into my face, my eyes. We have no idea what is going on, he said. Then he leaned his hawk face forward, and I closed my eyes again. He said viruses are the way Mother Earth finds out what is happening in her children, that viruses are readers. Based on the information viruses gather, he said, the Earth injects change into the ecosystem. He tells me that viruses are responsible for the development of higher consciousness. Sit up, he says, and I do, and he places some kind of board behind my back. Did you know that between 40 and 80% of our genetic code comes from ancient viruses? Lean forward, he says, and I do. Where'd you read that? I ask, and fully expect him to cite some other suspect hippie healer. In a journal called Cell, he says. Later, I look it up, and it's completely scientifically legit. He replaces the board behind my back with his hand, his fingers pushing into my spine, mid-back. Cross your arms over your chest, he says, and I do. Suddenly, he drops me back and pop, his fingers snap. He starts to position my head in order to crack my neck. I brace and then immediately go into panic quell mode, trying to relax my body, praying he won't paralyze me. This happens at every visit, anytime he readies to adjust my neck. He never paralyzes me. The world never ends. I keep thinking about the dream. Next to maroon pillow, I write, marooned. I wonder if I am dreaming about my own heavy body, a suitcase I'm lugging around while marooned inside it, body that is both me and not me, ever aware of the split between the bag of meat and the animating spirit, having to be the I they make together. What was that I, that psychoid thing? I's fate was to be a bridge and the awareness crossing it. Its cross was to believe it was a fortified castle, a king. Brightening up at the prospect of putting it in checked luggage. Or am I dreaming about poetry marooned inside me? I'd been having so much trouble writing, accepting what I was writing, being afraid to write because someone would see it after 4 books, with publishing like an invitation to attack or to silence that I couldn't possibly withstand, some kind of midlife paralysis going on for months and months and months and months. It was like redoing my time in the womb, except this time I was the mother trying to kill what I was in the midst of making. Next to maroon pillow, I write, the useless thing I value is marooned inside my body as I lug it past the carrion birds. Fledgling death birds, eaters just beginning, stamping and parading along the edge of the park mandala, daring me to enter, spreading out their finalizing wings. The way we imagine death is the way we experience birth. A harrow through the dark, and then a light. All the little deaths you have to walk through in order to be born and born and born. Jensen pushed down hard on my clavicles on either side of my neck as I wept. He said, can you let yourself be completely rewired? He said, this is what the earth is doing. We have to get ready. Each of us alone inside our bodies, each of us marooned in the suffering exchange while the world burns. I'd been feeling so paralyzed by Lord Time, how he numbered forward unswayed by human hope or need or aspiration, riding his stolid horse, death my fate. Later on the phone, I tell my sister about it. Maybe, she says, the message of your life is that you can come through trauma and be okay. An idea that completely floors me. In my journal, I write, you're afraid because you're already dead, really, when you think about it. And since you're already dead, don't you just want to live? The heroic narrative. Did you know that in ancient Greek, the word hero and the name Hera are closely related? Hera, mother goddess, who watched over women bearing children. As if to be a hero is to simply be a child of a mother. The cervix opening its round door, a sound welling up through the throat. Thank you. Oh my God, you're there. I can't see you. I have no idea what's happening. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dana. I'm standing at the podium. You can envision it.
Yeah,
So I don't know how well the actual convo part of this will work with the timing, but we can hold out hope. What I'm going to do first is I just want to say thank you to Left Bank, to St. Louis Poetry Center, Aaron, everyone involved, Ted, Ron. It was really lovely to have the work. Left Bank for hosting us, and Dana, thank you for your enthusiasm for this book and for basically helping to bring me here. So hopefully our combo will work. I chose this reading, it's a book length poem, and the measure of a lot of long poems have a measure, like, oh, it's a hexameter, or it's this. This is actually the page is the measure of the book, and each page is a kind of collage. So I'm gonna read 6 of these pages. And all I'm going to say about it is that it's a ekphrastic conversation with 2 visual artists, primarily Agnes Martin and Jasper Johns, and then some other artists. I think one of the artists will come into what I'm going to read. Being ill in my 30s is like certain paintings from the 60s. Agnes Martin saying yes to the grid and no to pretty much everything else. Rational and fetishistic, disciplined and obsessive, her tape and ruler and graphite lines floating on canvas. Like any sign, a symptom becomes abstract through repetition until illness too seems double-voiced. A materiality that says yes to what, that says no to what, is what I ask, negotiating. Define object, define event, move the inside of the picture, between invisible and visible, the ineffable and the clinic. What's considered to be the material? Flower, fruit, phallus, book and vase. What principles obeyed? What principles refused? Embodied by what materials and processes? The morning I vomit between parked cars and stand up, fog rolling off Twin Peaks. Not a drawing, not a structure. Not a speech, not a construction. With a stained collar, I go to the doctor, and now here is Jasper Johns, who writes in his sketchbook, "It is what it does. What can you do with it?" The way painters summon a color through touch, a feeling gathers in my gut. Continuous gesture, a little closer to orange. Each thought, not a long brushstroke, but rough, interrupted, moving toward fragment, notation, parataxis. A feeling of being cold from inside my body. Thoraco-lumbar core ache. Areas of red, yellow, blue, scratched out. Fill the space loosely. I want a theory of embodied life that is also a poetics, a technique for writing without violation of the central self. What's that? What I too often leave out. 3 part-time jobs, 2 side hustles, unpredictable pay. You can't make life or art, R says. You have to work in the gap between. Then I what? Begin with the possibilities of the materials and let them do what they can do. Space everywhere. Objects, no objects. Movement to accommodate the actual. Depositing $185 from a freelance gig. I'm still overdrawn. Down $2.58 for the week's groceries. To finish the job, I'd left everything else unfinished. To be exact, I'd left everything in writing unfinished. Debt again settles in my body next to illness. Chronic shift in my central self. Low income art, symptomatic art, everything connected below the surface. At night, the bedroom door rattles in its jamb. A storm's coming. Its dropping pressure pulses in my ears until I hear my heartbeat there. I wake and think, my mother. I hear the horn of a tornado, warning. On the horizon, a funnel turns against sallow sky. R also has fallen in love with someone he can't see clearly. We become more real to each other as we cuddle on the couch and watch films that reveal our deeper preoccupations. I weep during Barbara Loden's Wanda in a way I don't when my father dies. Your problem is you feel closer to art than people. Not closer to, safer with. In the basement, I worry the tornado will come straight over, and it does. I can't remember the noise, the chaos, just eerie quiet after it passes, then stuck in the dark. My life above ground gone. Passive, wandering around, not having any direction. I spend years of my life that way, not aware of the situation I'm in. I dream this after we watch Wanda. Into loving R, I bring all the places I've never been safe. How the river valley I'm from shoots tornadoes through town. How there's this extreme long shot of Wanda picking her way across a coal field that feels like my rural childhood, my mother's capacity to reduce my life to nothing. Always I see my far queer body through her estranging eye, as through a keyhole in a locked door. White flag, 1955. Encaustic, oil, and collage on fabric, 3 panels, 78 1/4 by 120 3/4 inches. For Lauren Berlant. And if you know this Jasper Johns painting, it's the white American flag that's really famous, very large, and it was the first painting to sell for 7 figures, which I have feelings about that. The flag's an affect, white as migraine, debilitating and interesting to lie down inside. The surface churn of pigment and wax, and figure how I feel, beginning with structure, a layer of paper and cloth collage over stretched sateen, sensual bedclothes of a rough fuck, paramnesia streaked with semen, the way sexuality hooks up with national fantasy, queer, and visited by crippling symptoms in the visual field of citizenship. I've been here before. As a boy, I earned a badge of merit, learning to handle the flag correctly. It takes a long time to remember all the rules, to fold and store it properly. It's the gentlest I have seen the white fathers who teach us, who take more care with that fabric than they do with a sissy, afraid of their Cold War masculinity, indifferent to their curriculum of flags, targets, and maps. I fashion a passionate impassivity in the locker room a lot, like Jasper Johns, his ready-made the mistake of a tragedy's protagonist, seeking suffering's end. I only add to it, a sleeper leaning harder into a difficult dream. To feel removed from the work, neutral toward it, Johns says of his flags, numbers, and maps, involved in the making, but not involved in the judging of it. Sort of like everyday life, whose surface appears impassive. The notebook holds something like chaos between its covers and can't contain it. Is there any need to enhance this characteristic? And this is the last poem I'll read, I think. I keep trying to get better. Illness is a rival worse to R than writing, a more complete withdrawal. In a dark room, I sit the migraine, straight-spined on a zafu. In a dark room, the healer Marintha, a friend of Miranda's, inserts needles into my skin and heat peels off my body like steam from a cup of tea. In a dark room, cool color differently through the material world until it's as specific and particular as any minute of any day. What I can't do, experience what is temporary. Illness might not be. Each symptom, each pain promises in the moment their permanence, and my mind lurches into a future where each hurts worse. Irregular, inexact, each line in the notebook calls attention to itself without giving direct access to skin. In a dark room, the nest of worked nerves that crowns my head stings. Each line singular, a circuit of vervain, lobed and toothed, spiked with mauve blooms opening. This is prescribed for what I think. My mind, the scald, the hot cup holds.
Okay, Dana's with us.
Dana, you are there.
I am, and are you there?
I am.
Oh my God.
And it sounds like we're actually talking to each other in time, real time.
Oh my God. So that is like totally amazing.
Magic has happened. Thank you.
It might not last for very long.
I see that.
So Dana wanted me to begin with kind of the origin of this pairing, and to sort of say a little bit. I first read The Appointment in the Yale Review, where it was first published. And not many of you know me, and some part of that is I'm a pretty private person. I've never been on social media. And I don't have the habit of like just writing strangers, but I actually did write Dana because I was so totally moved by The Appointment. And it reflected my own experience with a kind of very long period
I feel like this is a performance art routine. Hello?
Hi, Dana.
Can you hear me?
Can y'all hear that? Pretty well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We're going to talk over the phone now.
I love it.
So I just gave a preamble about the appointment.
All right. I'm just gonna give you the phone so that Dana can hear you,
Okay.
but then it'll be far away from, just in case.
Okay. Good. So I think we can proceed.
Okay, cool.
Y'all are saintly, but so Dana, maybe we could begin with the fact that both of these texts are prose based, and I wonder for you why the turn toward prose in thinking about this encounter with Jensen and with body work. What do you think, and especially the anxiety that you had, that you record so beautifully of being sort of the punishing mother who wants to kill the work that you're doing? I feel like there's an interesting tension between wanting this work to be born and in some ways formally being a kind of rewiring. For those of you who know Dana's work, it has not been like prose based before. So I wonder if you could speak about that.
Yeah. First of all, I hope everybody can hear me okay. At the same time that I was writing poems, I was also starting to write essays, and sometimes I would get confused about what belonged in what book and why. And I think I could not figure out how to tell the story of my birth in poetry. It just felt too confining in a way. And I think it's because at heart, I believe in the Classic Lyric Project, which is about economy and saying a lot with as little as possible. And this material just felt like it really wanted to expand. And I love what you said about the punishing mother, because one thing I forgot to say before I read the excerpt is that the whole reason I had the birth trauma was because there's a syndrome called Rh factor that they actually have a vaccine for now, but they didn't then, where my mother's immune system treated me as a disease. And so the longer I stayed in the room, the sicker I got, and they had to induce labor because if they didn't, I would have died. And the prose writing, I think too, and I should also say my mother and I have always had a very difficult relationship where she was very controlling and really wanted to tamp down my essential isness. And then I was always pushing against that. And it's like our very experience of me being in the womb and her carrying me, that idea of her body treating me like a disease to eradicate just infiltrated our whole life together. And maybe the writing of the prose was a way of just getting as big as possible, to bypass her, maybe, is a way of thinking about it.
Yeah, because you did write quite a lot about this birth trauma in your first book, in The Surgical Theater. And so I do feel like there you have sort of put it into maybe not like the most I don't know. What do you think about that? Because it is like you revisiting in some way that kind of foundational myth, or the way and by myth, I just mean that is how I read it when I first encountered that book when I was in graduate school. It felt like such a powerful foundational image, and it's such the center of that book. And this really feels like you reframe that image in such a powerful way. And you make it big too, I think. Beyond, and interestingly, also less mythic at the same time.
Yes, I'm nodding, though you cannot see me. I think in the surgical theater, everything got transformed into metaphor, and everything got packed into image, and that's really what I cared about. And I think in writing Appointment, I just wanted to tell the story as if I had never really said it. The thing about growing up in abusive family environments, and I haven't even talked about my dad, and but when you grow up in an abusive environment, there's this, you need to tell, but you must keep it secret, at least in my family. Poetry is an amazing technology for telling while keeping the secret. And I think that Appointment in particular came out in prose because I no longer wanted to keep it a secret.
Oh, I love that.
It's another way of thinking about it. And I wondered too, and for you, Brian, in terms of there's so much prose in this new book, like how you feel about the use of prose in this book and the relationship between prose and poetry in terms of coming through your own journey with a compromised body and feeling like you were gonna die.
I think I just really want to honor and kind of sit with what you said about not wanting to kind of keep a secret, and that there is something about poetry, and it's kind of what Emily Dickinson would call its essential slant nature, particularly of the lyric, which we love, right? Like it's not like we're here to shit on that or anything.
No.
But I do think what you're saying is like, it means other kinds of work can't really get done.
Right.
Because it's not what it's designed for, actually. And so sometimes we might want to turn toward prose for that reason, because there's a certain kind of work it can do that the lyric and lyric compression just cannot accomplish without being kind of exploded or really changed in its nature. So I just want to honor that. I love that. And I think that feels really true for me. A couple of things. One is that this book, as I think you could hear, it grew out of a notebook practice. And one of the things that you didn't hear, but I hope you will, I'm going to just be real crass for a moment. I hope you'll buy the book. Because I'm very proud of it. And I would love to sign it. But, it grew out of a notebook practice. That one of the tensions in this book is in this long-term relationship. And one of the tensions in that relationship is a kind of forbidding of writing by the partner, and a kind of competitiveness with the writing practice. And so I actually, to tell tales out of school, I actually wrote the empty form. I actually kept that promise that I would not write about our relationship. I erased him from that entire book and sort of really honored it, even though we were already broken up. And then it took me like literally a decade to get over this marriage, which some of you might resonate with who have had divorces. And it took me that decade to be like, why am I keeping this promise to this motherfucker who is like dead to me? So I went back to the journals that I did manage to keep. I did manage some writing. And so I did tell, kind of like what you're saying, Dana, I did actually replicate this childhood of erasing myself to a stronger power of in this dynamic with this partner. And so part of the notebook practice was kind of this secret place to kind of continue writing and not compete with this partner who was threatened by my practice and the attention it took. So that is one aspect. But another aspect was just rescuing from my obedience to Agnes Martin. The first book is only about her, or about her art. And as any of you know, she also forbid biography entirely. Like, no one could write about her when she was alive. She wouldn't divulge any information. She was really controlling. And in the first book, I sort of, in some ways, also replicated that toward a kind of lyric. Again, really what you're saying, Dana, really a lyric abstraction. And there were all these things, because she was also deeply anti-political and didn't believe in the social, which makes me really mad when people make $1 million off a painting and they're like, oh, but the social doesn't exist. And I'm like, oh, fuck you. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Because money is not a fiction in your life, by the way. One of the things the prose allowed me to do was also to write about the economics at that time. All of these things that I left out of the first book because of the kind of lyric and the stringency of the lyric and of the kind of abstract, kind of gridded practice in that book. So yeah, I flood all those details of the part-time jobs, and you and I also discovered, Dana, we shared like the colleges we taught at closed during the recession, like all of these things that really impacted health insurance, access to healthcare, and that are part of the working life of the artist. I just erased them from that first book. In the notebook practice and the prose really allowed me to bring in the context for the poetic, and to still move in a sort of slantwise way, because it's not super conventional prose. But I hear you, Dana. I feel like a lot of detail and granularity and the social and the political all kind of flooded in. And I had kind of kept them secret in a way from in the earlier practice, and also kept this kind of promise to a partner that, demanded something they shouldn't have quite demanded from me.
I'm really fascinated about the notebook quality, because my book also was the product of keeping a notebook. And maybe for both of us, it was a way of being born again, like getting into that raw place where the writing is between you and the page, and just letting it all kind of blah, and then wanting to try and preserve a little bit of the notebook quality, not even a little bit, a lot. I mean, there's even a piece in my book diary that are diary entries. I know that for me, I wanted it to stay kind of raw. That felt important to me. I didn't really understand why until now that I'm thinking about it, listening to you. I think I was trying to rebirth myself as a writer. In fact, all I'm doing is writing prose. Though I do love poems, and the prose is about poetry. Do you feel like there was a rebirth component also for you in terms of the notebook form, or that rawness was somehow important?
That's a good question. For those of you who don't know my work, and you should, honestly. As you know, Dana, like I've done sort of transcriptive projects of like writing while hiking, writing what I call en plein air, like out, in the woods and stuff, and kind of transcribing stuff in what I would call a kind of notebook practice. But what this book is, I think, is really different from that previous work that does draw on the notebook. And I think it's just because those poems aren't so much collage based, whereas for me, this was drawing some things that I like writing about my mother, I have never done before, honestly. So like that sort of intense feeling that arises from the difficulty of that relationship, particularly around my queerness. that rejection and abandonment was, I think I would never have done if it weren't in the notebook and I hadn't drawn it out. And it doesn't mean I actually didn't rewrite it and sort of discover new things about it in drawing it into this book and into relation with all the other materials. So that, but that dream, and that's one of the things that I think we both do in these books is use the dreams. So that dream of the tornado, it actually does, where I'm from, that's really actually true. But that dream was fascinating to me because it came in the middle of writing this book. And my mother was nowhere in it, but it was her. Like she was everywhere, sort of off stage, and she was the situation for the entire thing. And it was so interesting to me that it was that realization that I didn't quite understand at the time, but that when you do fall in love with someone, you bring every relationship you have ever had into that relation. And you also bring all of the abandonments and wounds from all those places I say that you've never been safe into the love relationship. And at the time, believe me, I was not prepared to do that. And I don't think my partner was prepared to be like, oh, here's this person who grew up in a like really, really religious household and abandoned by, in particular, his mother, but also deeply judged by the entire culture I grew up in. And he did not have that experience as a queer person, because all queer people aren't the same. So he really just was like, what is your experience? Like, this is weird. Like, is this like the 19th century or like early 20th century that we're talking about? And I was like, not everyone is an urban gay. Just so you know. And not all urban gays have that experience either. But, you know, he just had such a different life. And then was like, you're like a Faulkner novel. And I was like, yeah, kind of. Except Faulkner novels, I think, are funnier. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, I think it did allow me to do certain kinds of work. There is a poem in here that I think that the first line is, I prefer code to confession, because it's about shame and the kind of shamefulness of what that came up in relationship, both to my own disability, but also in the context of that relationship. And so I do think one of the things that the notebook made me do was sort of actually narrate some of the avoidance, those sort of code that I also tie to a writer like, or a painter like Jasper Johns, who some people see as using sort of codes of the Cold War to kind of talk about masculinity, et cetera, in certain coded queer ways. You also don't have to read him that way, and it's available. But so I do think I was trying to unpack certain codes I had made for myself at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think as young writers, you are really encouraged not to journal, if you know what I mean, not to use the notebook, the diary, the journal, or that's a kind of insult that you might give a poem, or you might dismiss a poem if you're a bad teacher by a young poet going, now this just kind of seems like journaling, so how do we turn it into art? But there is something that can happen in that notebook process where, you know, all of the truth comes out, and also the raw world view. And then it gives you material to work with, because even the thing that's called gosh, I can't even remember the title of my own piece. That's COVID. The one that's the diary, that's Santa Fe. Pledge.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, even that was worked and rearranged, but I did want to retain that kind of notebook quality. I wanted to switch gears for a second and just bring up something that I think it's important to talk about, is the notion of healing without cure, which is something that you mentioned in the book, and something that just felt so real to me in terms of just dealing with the pain of life, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual. And can you talk about healing without cure and how it infiltrates this book?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's one of the things I identified with in your essay, was this notion that, you know, particularly with chronic illness, and especially in your case of kind of this kind of birth injury that becomes a kind of chronic condition, that there is in some way no way to heal from certain well, there is no, I mean, in the Buddhist sense, there's no way to heal from birth, you know, like, you know, like you're born and that's the condition of suffering. And so I think, you know, when you want to have release from suffering, as so many of us do, I now sort of maybe lowered my standards. Like I was sort of thinking like, oh, there'll be a suffering that is like freedom from pain entirely. But I think one of the things I loved about the appointment, and one of the things I think my book is about, is sort of like that healing as an absorption and process, and maybe more about palliative care and sort of acknowledging the suffering that we're in and trying to sort of lessen that suffering, and even allow, for those of us who were born into abusive situations where you're not allowed to acknowledge the suffering, you have to keep the secret of your suffering, and the suffering continues, to even say to yourself like, wow, this suffering is large and I need some help. And I am also going to kind of narrate the situation and sort of encourage care in my life. I think that's an enormous shift in worldview, rather than turning the shame for needing care, shame around violating a secret, ooh, that I'm suffering. There's also this sort of ableist fiction that we're all supposed to be self-sovereign, you know, totally able-bodied all the time, don't need any help, don't help me. That means I'm weak, etc. And so I feel like I'm really interested in those gestures that feel like invitations toward care, and even just inviting care into one's life feels really healing to me. Even if it doesn't cure anything. Again, there's the wonderful queer disability activist, Eli Clare. I don't know if any of you know that person. Amazing activist, amazing writer. But they have a really, really intense kind of critique of the culture of cure and this sort of ableist emphasis on cure. There are some conditions that cannot be cured, right? And that this notion that all suffering or all must be somehow righted, when sometimes it just cannot be. And so what do you do then? And for me, I do say toward the end of the book, I believe care is the core of interpretive work, fragment of an immense form of mending together. And I think that notion of inviting an interpretation that's collaborative and is about sort of mending together in relation is really an important, even if it doesn't quote cure anything, it can still be curative, if that makes sense as a distinction.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how much I don't believe in progress anymore. And
I think that's about midlife, though.
it is about midlife. But what I do focus on now is endurance. Like not about overcoming, not about the vertical climb out of or the vertical climb towards, but the endurance of being immersed. Right? The endurance of being immersed in a body, in a world, in suffering, and how to endure. And I think that you and I have both found a lot of endurance in art. I mean, I think it's, what's kept us afloat, and probably lots of people in the audience also have that relationship with art. And process. I think that's why both of these books are so process oriented too, because that is the primary experience of immersion. If you are somebody who is called to make art, and if art is like a primary expressive vehicle, a primary way that you are in the world, artistic process becomes the reflection of that immersive experience of suffering while being alive.
No, I love that. I'm really conscious that we wanted to end with questions from the audience.
Yes,
And does this feel like a good pivot toward that, Dana?
it does to me if everybody can manage it. I mean, I have no idea if all you do is hear me. Is that what's happening right now? Because I can
We can totally hear you. You are so loud and clear, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. People are nodding joyfully.
Yay!
I don't know. You might not be. You looked joyful at the time. So any questions for Dana or I? Some of you had such interesting faces while we were talking. So I see that there are queries.
I can identify a lot with the pain. I have had myself chronic spinal pain for over 30 years, surgeries, and I've had massages, Reiki massages, energy flows. I've had massages where I burst into tears, and I'm not a person who cries easily. What I thought in particular when you're trying to describe this expansion into prose, what I was thinking about was epic poetry. I was thinking about Homer, because we were talking about the Iliad yesterday. And I mean, I don't read Greek. I know there's rhyme and there's meter and so forth, but it's a story. He's telling a story. It's not, it's not the lyric project of being concise and punchy. And I think that meter follows life much more than poetry. Poetry is art. It's not life itself. It's a comment on life. It's an artistic comment on life. But life is in waves, and it flows, and it ebbs, and it floods, and it does all those things, which both your book and Dana's book do those things to me. And despite the Wi-Fi issue, her reading of The Appointment, because I read her book. I mean, I remember that section, and I have to reread it again because I don't remember the section, the way she read it, right? And but that healing, that sense of healing, and then the background about your relationship and the secrets that were kept, the requirement of secrets. So much, I wasn't told keep secrets, right? You were told keep secrets, but growing up, nobody said keep secrets. We internalized it, right? We internalized it, right? Mom's an alcoholic, dad's a rageaholic, older brother's crazy, calling my dad Hitler. We lost family in the Shoah and Holocaust. It's crazy shit happened at the dinner table. And so I could identify with so much of that and that pain. And then what I think, just out of this, is that I've learned to pray and accept my pain as a gift. It's taught me patience. It's deflated my ego. It's taught me compassion and empathy, or it's carved it out of me. And I also think suffering is different than pain. Suffering is a focus of attention and a decision, conscious or unconscious. I'm in pain, but I choose not to suffer. And try to live life, right? Because this is it, right? And I think you say that, and Dana says that, right? And thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you're epic poets.
Awesome. Questions?
Yeah, we spent a little bit talking about the idea of moving from, a more traditionally line-based poem to now what we're working with more prosaic poetry or just prose in general. And it seemed like a lot of what you and Dana were discussing was finding new, I don't know if I would say identity or authority or somewhere in between those two things. And it seems so new to both of you to publish books like this. That's not something you're traditionally used to. So what I'm curious about is how, after this process, how your writing's informed going forward as writers, and how, what it means now to try and merge these two things, or to stick with one or choose the other, or when and what this looks like to you.
Yeah, Dana, I know you have kind of your answer in some ways already, right?
Well, I'm working on a prose book where, well, first let me just say that I think all writing is writing. I mean, to me at this stage, there's ways in which genre differences really feel like a product of the market more than the experience of writing, when we're talking about weird modes. You're going to write prose verse. I can't wait to write verse again. I love writing verse. But for right now, this just opened up a weird process of writing this thing that's kind of memoir, but kind of literary criticism, and is looking at poetry from both an intellectual place and a psycho-emotional place, and is trying to figure out how to merge the two. But it is definitely prose. It's paragraphs. Yeah.
I love what you said, because I do agree about, for me, like, it's the immersion and process that makes the focus is on writing and the process of writing. But I think I'm so excited by process and being inside of a book. For me, that space is so spacious and so interesting, and such almost like a three-dimensional. I love that you're nodding. I love that you have that experience too, because it's amazing to me. And it's one of the most magical experiences for me as a creative person, to just be in the process of the book and figuring it out. And it's one of the things that attracts me to the way visual artists work, is the studio as a space, and also the spatialization of painting itself, and the layering and sort of stripping and all this kind of stuff that, for me, working with collage really gets engaged in that. Physicality. So process for me is so exciting. And then also the kind of book length thing, or the long project, I find also delicious, because I love the lyric. And some of my mentors, like the amazing poet Jean Valentine, who, if you don't know her, she's a brilliant writer. And her collected will be out next year, I believe. But she writes like poems that are like 12 words. And they're the most perfect, beautiful 12 words, and they're amazing. And I'm deeply inspired by it. But I'm like kind of greedier. Like, I don't want, when I was younger, I really was sort of trained by the workshop to like love the closure and get to the close of the poem. And workshop is so like good at workshopping a one-page poem. Those of you who are in workshop right now, you know the feel of like, and you're kind of punished for writing an unwieldy, long thing that doesn't have an end yet, and you're not sure. And workshop is like, why did you bring this mess to me? I don't know what to do with it. And so I feel like we're kind of trained away from the longer thing and the exploratory process-based kind of writing by the MFA, which is, again, is not, I teach in one. So, but I don't teach that kind of workshop because I didn't thrive in it. So I really love the expansiveness of being inside a longer thing. And so for me, kind of like with Dana, it's not so much anymore. Like, I'm also really inspired by the writer C.D. Wright, who also kind of like not that interested ultimately in like sort of hewing to one genre. And that a book, if you're thinking about the book as a duration, can contain all sorts of stuff. And why does it have to be just all lyrics or all whatever? So I do feel, your question's great. I should also say all of my books are super different. So it's not that weird for me to suddenly write a very different thing than the last book. And I have no idea what's next.
I want to say one thing about Brian's book that you'll see when you read it. If you know the Japanese form haibun, I've got a lot of inspiration from it. You know, the classic haibun is a prose travelogue that then is capped at the end by a haiku that is sort of the essence expression of place as opposed to the travelogue. And what I loved about reading all of Brian's book, which I read in one sitting on a flight and then read again, is it's like a very long haibun. When it ends, the very last thing it ends on, and I hope Brian will read the very last page of that book before we say goodbye. It's just like the most gorgeous classic verse encapsulation of this very long journey that is mostly in prose, or at least in very long lines, and can be very discursive. And I just felt such a thrill getting to that last verse page. I felt as if the entire book, I had been invited into the cauldron of its making to get to that very last. I think it's maybe 6 stanzas, is it?
It's a sonnet.
It's the sonnet, yes.
Yeah.
So exciting to me. So exciting.
Oh, Dana, that's so beautiful. And it's gratifying to me because that is what I wanted.
Ah, yay!
Just described like really like being in the book and being like, can I make this final page work? Will it do this thing that I really want it to do? And you wrote me in an email that it did that. And I was just like, mic drop. Like I fucking did it. I really made it happen. So I felt that's really gratifying because one of the challenges, those of you who've written books, and I wonder if you feel this way too, Dana, is like when you really are writing a long thing, it's a little easy to get lost in the structure. And especially when that's not necessarily how you've written every book. And so you get a little bit like, I think I tracked like all the patterns in this long 100-page thing, but I don't know. Like maybe I dropped a stitch, or maybe this final thing doesn't do what I hoped it would do. So I love that. I'm very heartwarmed.
Yeah.
And verklempt. Yeah. So maybe I'll read that page and then let y'all go. Does that feel good? It feels like the right timing. Does that feel right to you, Dana?
Yes, it does. I just want to say before you do it, thank you, audience, for being so patient. And thank you, Shane, for like trying to figure this out on the fly. And I hate having COVID. And let me tell you, as soon as we log off, I am probably going to collapse back on my bed where I spent all day. But this does make me feel more human. And I'm thank you for listening to us. And I hope it's been interesting. And inspiring. So, and Brian, please call me later.
I will. And thank you for being not just human, but a beautiful human.
Oh,
and sharing that with us, despite having COVID.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read a little bit. As Dana said, this final page kind of leads out of the page before. So I'm going to read the setup, which returns us to a scene of body work, actually. And then I'll read that final page. The healer Marintha cups my occiput again and pulls up gently. The migraine goes all aurora, hot pour of green closer to yellow in folds. Author of color without words, she fingers the shut plates of my skull until they relent, release a clear gleam. The touch of consciousness upon itself, the knowledge of being here, enfolded, asleep in her thinking hands, what it means to me. Though John's eschews interpretation, I don't think you can talk about art and get anywhere. And Agnes insists on her own. These paintings are about freedom from this world. I believe cares the core of interpretive work, fragment of an immense form of mending together. A painting can't wake up from wordlessness and say, this roseate stain on the last page, this skewed blue crossed by contrails. What is color but a kind of bliss? The leaf cutter lifts its green shape across social space, the shade of maples, dark as this type. You draw near to search the face that won't turn away.
Ooh. Yes.
Thank you again, Dana.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here, for putting up with all the technical things. We do have books available for sale at the desk, and Dana will sign once like she is able to recover a little bit. But if you'd like to have Dana sign a book, we can take care of that at the desk. You'll just purchase one tonight, and then Dana will come and sign it, and then you can either have it mailed to you or pick up. Clean this up really quick, and then you can load it.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is- Hi.